This, the San Zeno calendar, made in about 1455, within a year of the printing of the Gutenberg Bible, is the only object of its type to have survived from the Middle Ages. Mounted on a wall and hanging for over 3 centuries in the cloister of the Benedictine Abbey of San Zeno, Verona, it was the primary timekeeper for the monks, who saw it and used it daily to organise their devotional schedule. Its 3 dials can be rotated by hand and chart the phases of the moon, the zodiacal calendar of the stars, the amount of daylight occurring in any given day of the year, and the feast days and times of the saints to whom the monks intended to pray. This remarkable object hung on the wall in the cloister of the Abbey of San Zeno and was placed in such a way that it had been seen by all of the monks several times each day, as they left the dormitory for matins at about midnight and as they returned to bed, as they returned to the church in the morning, and when they retraced their steps again back to bed in the evening. It would have been the monks' only way of telling the time. It was, in effect, their clock, because it told them what time the sun rose and set each day, how many hours of light and darkness there were, changing with the seasons, and thus allowed them to tell the time based on the sunrise, sunset, and the position of the sun in the sky. The calendar stands as evidence to the tradition of astronomical observation at Verona in the 15th century, a tradition that dates back to Pacificus, who died in 844, who invented a primitive form of astrolabe for telling the time during the night at Verona Cathedral. To understand the San Zeno calendar, one needs first to understand a little about medieval timekeeping in general, and specifically about timekeeping within a Benedictine monastery. Astronomy and religion were inextricably linked in the Middle Ages. The date of the most important feast of the Christian ecclesiastical year, Easter, and every other feast whose date depended on it, such as Lent and Pentecost, was based on the variable date of a full moon occurring in March or April. Thus, at the very least, church authorities needed to be able to predict in advance the relationship between the phases of the moon and the 365-day year. Questions of astronomical timekeeping were therefore crucial, and some of the greatest minds applied themselves to the problem, including the Venerable Bede in the 8th century in our own country. But even today, the Eastern Church celebrates Easter on a different date to that of the West, due to differences in how the dates were calculated in the early Middle Ages. Daily life in any Benedictine monastery, including San Zeno, was dictated by the liturgical hours at intervals of about 3 hours from midnight until 9 p.m. the next evening. So seasonal variations in the length of the day and night were also a fundamental concern. As early as the 5th century BC, it had been realised that, although the solar year and the lunar month did not correspond neatly with one another, the relationship between them would repeat every 19 years. Thus, if one could calculate data for a whole 19-year cycle, it could be reused in perpetuity, restarting every 19 years. As the Middle Ages progressed, astronomical observation became more sophisticated. Increasingly precise instruments, such as astrolabes, were manufactured, and greater numbers of scientific texts were translated into Latin from Arabic and Hebrew. Knowledge that features of the world and the cosmos repeat themselves regularly, including seasons, phases of the moon, tides, led to their obvious representation on circular devices from a very early date. But different cosmological features observed cycles of different lengths. The sun appeared to repeat in a cycle lasting about 365 days, while the moon had a cycle of about 19.5 days. The most efficient way of representing cycles that were out of step with one another was by means of a volvelle, a device that allowed the different cycles to be represented by rotating discs of different sizes. The Benedictine Abbey of San Zeno had an illustrious history of astronomical scholarship, and it is perhaps thus less surprising that it should commission an astronomical calendar unlike any other known to have existed. We've not been able to find any reference to any other comparable medieval volvelle astronomical calendar, nor have we found any documentary evidence that any other ever existed. The closest comparisons that we've been able to find are the famous astronomical clock in Prague, originally most of which dates from about 1490 and heavily restored in more recent years, and the similar astronomical clock in St Mary's, Gdansk, dating from the late 1460s, which was severely damaged in 1945 and subsequently heavily restored. Let's take a closer look at how it works. The various columns of letters, numbers and text from the outermost to the innermost concentric circle are as follows. The day of the month in Arabic numerals, the day of the month in Roman numerals, the Sunday letters or littera dominicalis for determining which dates the Sundays fall in any given year, saints' days in the liturgical gradings, the golden numbers to be used with a table indicating the date of Easter. These solve the problem of calculating the date of Easter for Sunday under the Gregorian calendar. The age of the sign of the zodiac in red, the sidereal months, the the time needed for the moon to return to the same place against the background of stars. The next 3 pairs of columns each give increasingly long periods of time. Half length of the night, full length of the night, the full length of the night plus half the length of the day. Depictions of the signs of the zodiac, with 2 labels stuck on each, some now missing. One is inscribed with the name of the sign, Aquarius, Pisces, Aries, etc. The other with the word bonum, indifferens, or malum, indicating whether it's a good, indifferent, or bad time for bloodletting. The next 2 concentric circles show the age of the moon. By turning a pointer, attach the innermost discs so that it points to the age of the moon. A hole in the disc reveals a depiction of the phase of the moon from new moon to full and back again, with intermediate crescents showing its waxing and waning. The artist of the miniatures has not been identified. The closest stylistic parallels are with Lombard painters working in the middle of the 15th century, such as the Maestro Parotto's Madonna and Child, with saints and crucifixion polyptych in the Bagatti Valsecchi Museum, Milan, and famous tarot sets of tarot cards or tarocchi by the workshop of Bonifacio Bembo, also in Milan, and works by the Zavatari brothers, such as the frescoes in the chapel of Queen Theodolina, Monza Cathedral, executed by Ambrogio and Gregorio Zavatari in 1444. There is ample liturgical evidence that the calendar was made for use in the Benedictine Abbey of Zeno, Verona. The highest grade feasts include 21st March, Benedict, founder of the Benedictine order, 12th of April, the deposition of Zeno, Bishop of Verona, 21st of May, the translation of Zeno, 8th of December, the ordination of Zeno, and the 10th of December, the dedication of the Basilica of San Zeno, etc., etc. The calendar is recorded attached to the wall in the cloister of San Zeno in the middle of the 18th century. Giambattista Biancolini, de Vescovi e Governatore di Verona, Bishops and Governor of Verona's, published in 1757, has the following passage. A curious calendar is tucked into the wall of the loggia, which leads from the dormitory of San Zeno Monastery to the choir and the sacristy of the church. This calendar is very large, beautiful and accurate, written on paper, it's actually vellum, on a circular panel that it is possible to rotate for the convenience of readers, placed there in about 1455 for the use of the monks of San Zeno. If Biancolini is correct about the date of the placement of the calendar in 1455, he must have had information no longer available, perhaps an inscription painted on the wall of the cloister, or a document in the Abbey archives now lost. Then it was doubtless commissioned by Gregorio Correa, who was abbot of San Zeno from 1448. San Zeno was plundered by Napoleonic troops in 1797, one result of which is that the 3 predella panels of Mantegna's San Zeno altarpiece, commissioned by Abbot Correa and painted in 1457 to 1460, are today in Paris at the Louvre and tours in the Musée des Beaux-Arts. By the early 20th century, the calendar was the property of Conte Antonio Maria Cartolari of Verona, and it may have entered the noble family's collection during the Napoleonic upheavals through one of their ancestors. They are recorded as owning a portrait of an ancestor called Bartolomeo, who was a monk at San Zeno. The calendar was exhibited at the Morgan Library's exhibition, Now and Forever, The Art of Medieval Time, in 2018, where it played a central role in tying together the various themes of time and the Christian Church. An early scientific instrument, a computer if you will. Because of the date to 1455, the calendar marks the transition from the Middle Ages to the Renaissance. As an object, it's essentially medieval in character, yet the artist is decidedly Renaissance in style.